Hello, I'm Dr. Mewborn, and this is History of the Baptist. We are in Lesson 8, also known as the Stuart Era. Let's go ahead and jump into our study. We ended last time talking about King James and King James Stuart, the first is who we're looking at. And so we want to pick up there again. He lived from 1566 to 1625. He's the King of England and of Ireland. James did not like religious liberty. King James was obsessed with religious uniformity. He sought to bring harsh punishment or exile to those who refused to conform to the Church of England. He thought he was God's deputy for order and uniformity. And if people fought against the authority of the church, they would quickly fight against the king. And so his stance was being very strong in his role. And he thought if people are willing to come against the church, then they would be willing to come against him directly. And that was completely against his thinking as king, as God's ordained man for his position. And so he's also the one who brought forth what we know as the King James Bible, as we looked at last time. Had a son, King Charles the First, lived from 1600 to 1649. There is a picture of him. Reigned from 1625 to 1649. Upheld religious uniformity like his father, King James. Some historians believe that he was more violent persecuting the nonconformists than his father was. He called himself the supreme governor of the church. And so he saw in this role that he was in just as strong as his father. There was this strong push against the nonconformist, pushing them down as much as as he possibly could. And so you see many people leaving England because of this. Some people trying to purify, many people separating, and then of course you have people doing actually getting in trouble for trying to follow their conscience and their convictions. But during this time, Baptist persecutions were definitely happening under King Charles I. We look at this as like the persecuted church in many ways, but goods were taken from homes. They endured whippings. Imprisonments were common during this time. Some were maimed, ears were cut off, and noses were slit with a knife. Some were executed, and others were confined to prison. While in prison, many Baptists died of disease. And so what you have here is a true persecution, and it's a religious persecution. Sometimes we miss this. We think it's all about government and it's persecuting the state. Well, or persecuting the church. That is true in a sense, but this is also coming from the religious persecution of the Church of England that has been in place. But as we continue on, let's go and now let's see what's also happening on this other side. John Smyth, who is the founder, what we call the founder of the Baptist Church, the Baptist beliefs. And John Smyth, 1609, we kind of see where all that took place. But look at what look at this about him. Magistrates do not have the right, this is what he felt, they do not have the right to compel men or women to a specific form of religion, doctrine, or church. Smyth believed and stated that Christ is the only king and lawgiver of the church and conscience. He's the only one. It does not come from a king. It does not come from just a pope. It's Christ alone. That's who it comes from. Also, he said, government is limited to civil transgression. So what government should be focusing in on is civil rights and taking care, making sure that people live in a decent, moral, ethical way. These concepts eventually became two important civil rights, the separation of church and state, or as well as religious liberty. And that's what we see here. Even in our Constitution in the United States of America, we actually see these two right at the beginning of our Constitution: separation of church and state, religious liberty, those types of things. Thomas Helwys also talked a lot about these things, and he came against the leaders in government leaders in the church world by comparing them to the book of Revelation. Helwys connected the Roman Catholic Church and the Anglican Church with atrocities found in Revelation 13. The first beast in Revelation 13 was the Roman Catholic Church. The second beast in Revelation 13 was the Anglican Church. So he saw them as bringing horrendous atrocities to people, the true church, the true people of God. Helwys believed that the Catholics and the Anglicans were ungodly, while the Puritans and Separatists were not godly enough because of partial separation. You see, there was a stance that he had. He was saying, okay, the, the Catholics, Anglicans, it's obvious. What they're doing is completely separate from what God is doing. They're actually enemies of the church. But what he was saying about the Puritans, he was saying they were on the right track. They were doing the right things in through Reformation, reforming the churches as they possibly could, or separating from the church, but they didn't go far enough. And that was his thing. And this is how the Baptist church is starting through his confessions. It's starting and developing because he's seeing what other people are doing or what they're not doing and what they should be doing. Also, with Helwys, he was ahead of his time in regards to religious liberty for all people. Helwys stated, "Let them be heretics, Turks, Jews, or whatsoever it appertains not to the earthly power to punish them in the least measure." Helwys' stance on religious liberty was so radical to some people that it probably cost him support. I found this picture and I thought, wow, this is kind of an interesting picture. You see all these belief systems, all these signs of all these different belief systems, and then you see the Statue of Liberty, and there's the freedom of religion. It's this idea you have a religious freedom here. Helwys actually believed that. He said, it doesn't matter where you come from, you should never be persecuted or beat down for those beliefs if you're a moral and decent person. And that's why Smyth said government should deal with these civil transgressions, but they should stay out of the way that people worship in their own right. And so that's where you see this. The Baptist is so unique in this form of religious liberty, and they're the ones who are the spearhead, really, of religious liberty. Continuing on about Helwys, he challenged the king. All right, this is King James. He actually challenged him. Thomas Helwys wrote a short declaration of the mystery of iniquity, London 1612. This is right after the King James Bible was being published, and that's actually the same time that the King James Bible was available. It was like in a London bookstore. You could go get it. It wasn't a huge copy. It was actually a handheld copy that you could have. And so it's right after this, and he's writing saying, hey, there's problems. Helwys wrote that no king or queen has power over their subjects' consciences. He also stated an earthly sword is ordained of God only for an earthly power, and a spiritual sword for a spiritual power. He sent an autographed copy to the king. And this is, of course, what we're talking about here, a short declaration of the mystery of iniquity here. And so this is incredible. Well, because of that, he ended up going to prison. Sometimes people call it the Helwys challenge, as in king, do this because it's the right thing to do. But actually, he ends up in prison after that, and just not a great experience for him. But he was strong in his convictions. As we continue on with the Time of Turmoil, this moves us forward in the timeline to 1640 to 1648. Westminster divines abhorred religious liberty. Presbyterian ministers believed that religious liberty was the worst possible evil. Can you imagine? Presbyterians saying this is the worst possible evil. Some said this, like Thomas Edwards said this, that religious liberty is the grand design of the devil. It reminds me of something that's happened when you try to do something that you know is of God, and you have somebody that's very religious say that what you're doing is going down the road, or you're the devil's workshop. And you're sitting there going, what is happening here? And that's what he's referring to. He's saying there that this is ungodly. And so people have all types of convictions. This was his, completely against the Word of God in every single way. Time of Turmoil, as we continue on. Our textbook talks about Edward Barber, who was a merchant who became a Baptist, stated that infant baptism has no foundation in Scripture. Christopher Blackwood wrote treatises against what he called the half Reformations. He believed that people did not truly reform the Catholic Church, Roman Catholic Church, or the Anglican Church. Instead, they did something that was so common in the religious world. And I'm going to give you an illustration to kind of explain it to you. This is a beautiful looking lodge, right? And it's right on a mountainside. And I'm giving you a picture and just an old story that deals with um, uh, an inn called Mediocre Inn in the French Alps. The story goes this way. There was a group of hikers going up a very tough mountain. And when they get to this point, what's called the Mediocre Inn, they can tell it's warm inside, it's beautiful inside, it's a great place where they can relax, they can get comfortable, they can get some food, they can get a nice shower, everything is good for them. And what they do is they end up saying, well, we're just going to stay, we're not going to go any further because we've made it to the Mediocre Inn. This is good enough. And what many of these early Baptist or nonconformists were saying is, we've got to keep going. And that's what was so unique about them, because many of the separatists, many Puritans, many of these types of folks did not continue to go forward. They actually stopped when they went so far, and that's why Helwys and Smyth had such a struggle with that. And they wanted to see the church continue on with religious liberty, those types of things. We get to the next slide here, and we're looking at the saints regime. This is the year of 1648, the years of 1648 to 1660 here. As we continue pushing on through, we see the Baptist Church growing as well, as we've seen some of those timelines already. But King Charles I was executed because he believed in sovereign immunity. No court had jurisdiction over a monarch during this time. That's what he thought. He also believed that God elected him King of England. And because of this, he was actually killed because they voted against him, and that he would be beheaded. And so what happens is he is executed. During this time, there is a change. And as a result of this, Baptists experienced wonderful growth and maturity during these years. It was like they had somewhat of a freedom, because there was almost no one that was pushing toward religious persecution. There was nobody holding down the nonconformists. Nobody was really doing that at this time. And so the Baptists began to flourish. They took advantage of relative liberty and public favor of evangelical Protestantism. The Baptists were finally able to preach publicly, form churches, issue confessions, and distribute material. And this is where everything just began to flourish. They were doing very well during this time. And they were defending what you would say is religious liberty all this time. But what happens is, as it continues on in 1660 to 1688, you see, after years of relative peace, Baptists in England endured some of the greatest persecution starting in 1660. Baptists were singled out because their strong stances for religious liberty. Baptists were blamed for all the issues regarding church and state in England. And then there is this Act of Uniformity that takes place in 1662. And this changed everything once again. All English ministers had to believe the same doctrines and conduct worship by the same liturgy. Public prayers, sacraments, and other rites had to be consistent with the Church of England and the Book of Common Prayer. You see, that was put out by Thomas Cranmer. And then all ministers, deacons, and bishops had to be ordained through an episcopal ordination. And so here's this book, the Book of Common Prayer, and it's also talking about sacraments, the rites, the ceremonies of the church. What this book is you can look through it very quickly, but it's got morning prayers, evening prayers. It teaches you how you do the sacraments. It shows all these things. These are the prayers you have the church repeat after you on certain things if you were leading the services, and it gives you that. It gives all those things, and it says this is how you are to conduct your daily activities, daily devotions, as well as church services. And this is the way. Well, a lot of people would not follow this. They just couldn't by their own convictions. And so as a result of the Act of Uniformity in 1662, 20% of the English clergy were kicked out of their positions because they could not sign over to that. Clergy included Presbyterians, Congregationalists, Independents, and Baptists. Approximately 2,500 ministers lost their positions. It's called the Great Ejection. Also made the dissent more respectable because people were seeing, hey, this is a bigger widespread thing than we thought. And I found this a picture, and this is a what they call a complete collection of farewell sermons and from these ministers because of the Great Ejection. And really, that was just a response of the Act of Uniformity and of 1662. Okay, all right. Well, that's it for today. Good to be with you. I hope you have a great rest of the day. God bless you. Bye-bye.